an opportunity to overcome my temptation to respond in a triggered way and instead respond with acceptance and love. But here's the deal. Emotions don't go away until we process them. And we don't process them in the head. We process them in the body. But everyone that I work with, I try to help them see ways that they can align in beautiful ways to their situation and in ways that can inspire others to do the same.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes. Hi there, I'm Sifu Slim, and I am coming to you live from Austria, Vienna, Austria, which is a wonderful city, one of the best transportation cities in the world. And you wouldn't believe how that helps the visitors, like as in the tourists and business travelers, and the people who live here. It's just makes everything so easy because it keeps you off the roads, less cars, less pollution, less noise. So we're all on mass transit and we get to interact with each other as we wish on the mass transit. And today I got to see a bunch of children in their summer camp following their leaders. One leader was a female in her 40s, and the other leader was a gentleman probably 80 years old, and they all had the same t-shirts on. And this is their time to learn some summer things, enjoy, interact, have some mentoring and some mentee relationships. Just a really nice occurrence. So I advise people who are in urban planning to take a good look at Vienna. There are many documentaries about their transportation and their building codes on YouTube, and many in English you could take a look at. So today I'm sharing a wonderful connection with a gentleman who's in Tampa, Florida, and he has training in many areas of wellness, mind, body, and spirit, and he's a shaman. And so I'll bring on Israel Bouseman to say hello to us from Tampa, Florida.
Hello and blessings. Thank you, Sifu, for having me on today. And such a pleasure to be here. And well, I just want to invite this conversation to bring in consciousness and connection and compassion and open up doors for people. So thank you so much for the opportunity, brother.
Oh, it's been great just hearing about you, reading your websites. I hope to read your books on the canoe trip that I mentioned, because everybody, when they jump on a podcast, if they're new to these types of things or new to radio shows or new to me, they may have some questions about where we're going. And what I try to tell them, it's as simple as us being attendees at a basketball game and we're sitting on bleachers. Or I say we find ourselves in a canoe. We put on our sun hats, we push out into the current, and we go with the flow. And then when it's time, we find ground. And if that trip is not enough, we'll do it again from a different starting point. So we'll have interview or discussion number 2. And number three, and we could even check in a few times per year as we go forward. And so I jokingly said to Israel, keep your sun hat available, because if we want to do it again, I'd welcome that. So how do you think about the canoe trip idea? Is that a good way to lighten the concentration for the visitors to my site who are the visitors to the podcast who may be new?
Oh, I love it, by the way. When I heard you share it at first, I shared it with my brother because I've done a few podcasts recently, and usually we decide on a talking point beforehand. And so he'd ask me, it's like, so what is this podcast going to be on? I said, man, we're just going to get in the canoe, put the hat on, and see where it goes. And both of us had a little chuckle around that. That is it's the funnest way to converse, man.
Yeah. I think that I do both. I'm usually a prepared person, and that's helped me just in general confidence and incompetency, because when I'm prepared, I already have been doing some thinking and organizing on the computer screen and in my head. And then, of course, as we sleep on it, our neurology and the good karma that we have and any good intentions and integrity, all that stuff starts organizing in our head. And so it's already there, kind of like Roger Federer or Alcaraz when they get their tennis game to a level where they just know ahead of time how good they are and how connected they are with all their mind, body, and spirit. They're coaching their family. They just have that feeling when they walk onto the court that this is the best they can offer at this current time, and they feel good about it. And then the good athletes, I do a lot of work with athletes, they know that if the other person's on their game and they've got all those things shining as well, that hey, it's the battle, some people call it, it's the interaction, it's the win and the victory, but it's also being a good sport, which I keep hearing from English people about the notion of being a good sport. It's not about winning and clobbering and demolishing. In war, of course, it is much more of that, but it's about, in athletics, it's really this history of being gentlemanly, if that's an appropriate word, being honorable. What do you think about some of those things, Israel?
Well, I feel like most of life is games. A lot of the games we take very seriously. And when we take them so seriously, it gets really hard to actually enjoy them. We get very invested in the outcome. But the more that we can actually step back and enjoy the game as it's playing out, then the much more that we can enjoy any particular thing that we're experiencing. So I like that a lot. But the big thing that actually came to mind were the aha moments. So I work a lot with different ways that the mind works. And a lot of times we've been taught in a very intellectual way, in a very left brain linear way. So when we have a problem before us, we'll sit down and think it out and weigh out the bits and plot it and plan it. And all of this is really good. That's a beautiful approach to have in your toolkit. But what I love are the aha moments, the epiphanies, because we've got our lower mind, which is dealing in a very linear and logical way with the information that comes in. And we've got the higher mind, which is connected to the subconscious and which is constantly processing anything that's going on. But in order to get the feedback from the higher mind, we got to create a little space. So this is what I love to do. Like you were saying, like plan and then sleep on it, let it consolidate in there in the mind. I like to send a question back or send a topic back and let it roll around and just give it time to kind of do its own thing. And then I'll find that when I create some space or when I start to write or when I engage in a conversation, it'll generally come through having formed itself into a clearer shape, into a beautiful little configuration to share with others. So that's really the biggest bit that comes to mind when you share that.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think these people I spent time with in the martial arts, and we work on self-mastery, again, mind, body, and spirit, karma, intentions, honor, respect, all these wonderful things, growing in that journey, growing from others, growing with the times where you have to dig down deep or just accept that now is not your moment, or accept that no matter how hard you work, there's someone that has a different level of capacity in that endeavor. And so those are all things that are part of the growing experience. And I think that's lovely. And I wanted to share, Israel asked me before we got going here today about the background that's behind me. And you can see these steps going up. This is in Hawaii, not too far from Honolulu. I always have to remind myself not to say Honolulu. I'm from New Jersey, where we can be a little bit nasal. And Honolulu is the way you say Hawaii, not Hawaii, Honolulu, like maybe I thought when I was in a young lad. But anyway, this is this tropical area that is called the Chosen Z, Chosen Z, and I'll write that proper spelling down in the comments underneath. And it's a temple, Japanese temple, where they do martial arts and they do calligraphy and they have ceremonies here. And it's just a really special place. And if you have the right intentions and the right honor, and people feel moved to visit this place, that you can send them an email and go visit it. And they have a sitting practice that you can do. And as a person who has maybe some biomechanical challenges, being tall and thin and having a really long back, one of the most challenging things physically I've ever done is the sitting practice at this temple. And you're in a martial arts center with these beautiful swords and wooden swords and artwork from Japan. And you'll see that on the wall. And now you're in here and you're taught how to sit, you're taught what the purpose is, you're taught how to handle it. And now you have to sit in this position where you do certain things with your hands and you're doing certain posture, but you're taught not to think. You're taught not to let the mind wander and be busy-minded. You're taught to be more emptying of all that energy and all that thought. And you're taught to go back to the number one. You just say, when you're in that thing, you say to yourself, without verbally speaking, you say one. And you just keep going back to that. And the people who have mastered it, I still think that, when I asked them, they still said it's a challenge for an hour or two or an hour and a half to sit there in that posture and keep your mind at rest. So that's one of the hardest things that I've done physically and mentally. Does that sound familiar to you, Israel? And if so, maybe you could share about that and some of the things that you've done that were the most challenging mind and spirit and physical to you.
One of the first things that comes to mind when you share that is that there's different ways of actually focusing the mind. So you can actually focus the mind intensely on a single point, or you can do a soft focus that doesn't actually require a single point, and it's more of a space of allowing. And both of these are very challenging ways to actually work with and refine the mind. Both of them will help to tone up the attention, which gets unfocused and scattered if we have never trained it. But they're different kinds of exercises, and they give us the ability to do different things. So that single point focus, just coming back to one, that's a beautiful way of using meditation to contemplate. Like in yoga, you would prepare the mind for meditation by learning concentration so that you could fix it upon a single point during the entire process of the meditation. With zazen, it's more that open and just allowing the thoughts to come in and to flow. And with both of these things, I found them very challenging, but not necessarily in terms of one single practice. Like, these things have opened up to me in layers over the years. I remember, so I had a beautiful Sifu in Tai Chi and Kung Fu when I was younger. And in learning Tai Chi, I remember him saying once, this, and it was a brush knee push he was demonstrating to us and giving us all the details. And he said, this will take you 10 years to master. And I was thinking, I was a 16-year-old at the time. I'm like, 10 years? That's just, I can't even imagine that far, and I've laughed at it a few times in recent years. I'm like, yeah, that was 25 years ago. All right. Okay. So I think, in a way, the hardest thing is to maintain steady growth, steady focus, to use each day as a living practice. Because for me, it's really easy to get in those points where I get really, really intense and I have, hours of practice every day, hours of meditation, full on. But when I follow the temptation of intensity, I'll tend to have a bit of progress, and then I'll get exhausted and I'll need to pull it back, and then I'll get going again, and it creates this little sine wave. So what I've been learning to do is to dial the intensity back and dial the presence up, and just make every single bit of my life a living practice of presence. So some of the hardest things have really been some of the most transformative. I'll share with you a story about an interaction with one of my teachers. And this teacher, she has been a tantrika for probably the last 30 years now. And I met her during my time in Bali, within probably the first year there. And we were interacting with one another. And I developed intellectually a lot earlier than I did emotionally. I worked with a lot of meditation, a lot of energy work, a lot of study of the scriptures, a lot of understanding the ideas behind the path. And all that's beautiful. It's wonderful stuff. But in a way, all of the ideas just really get us to the gate. I'd spent much of my life really trying to control my emotions, sometimes bypassing them. No, I don't feel that way, or no, I feel this way instead, and feeling like I needed to be strong and like I needed to present that strong face, So these were patterns that started very early for me in my life, and they had to be unearthed one little layer at the time. I think probably the most challenging moment, not the most, there have been a few, but one of the most challenging moments that I can remember was meeting with this teacher. Eve was her name. And she could see that I was completely unconscious in my relating, that I had stuff coming up. I was locked in my head, and I just wasn't aware of it at all. So she pulled back from the interaction, and she just asked me, "What's coming up for you?" And I started looking around inside all the places I knew to look, and I was like, "I don't know. What am I supposed to say right now?" She turned some music on and had us dance a little bit and just move to it. And I was feeling shy. I'm not a dancer. What if I make a fool of myself? Or, what if I look funny or embarrass myself or whatever like that? All these old stories, which they can persist in our minds, in our hearts, in our body and being for years after we've been studying things that intellectually would explain to us why we no longer need to feel that way, right? Oh, you shouldn't care about what other people think. But there's still this emotional core that comes in that we have to feel and address before the way that we should feel, the way that is potential for us, can actually line up with the way that we do. So long story short, I moved, I danced a little bit, and then we sat down and she said, "Now what's coming up for you?" So again, I'm looking inside, I'm trying to figure out like what is coming up. I don't even know, and I started to feel really embarrassed. I started to feel like I was not strong, like I was not in control. And I was able to actually express that much. It's like, okay, like I'm starting to have tears come down. I feel exposed. I feel humiliated. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed, and expressing these things. She taught me so much in that one moment because she was able to hold space without judgment, in a place of complete acceptance and making it okay for whatever was actually going to come up. And now that's all I could really manage in that one moment. I was able to say, okay, I feel overwhelmed. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. I feel humiliated. It's like, okay, all right. Now I've got something else to do. So I made my exit and I walked. It was about a half hour back to my homestay. This was in Bali at the time. And when I first started the walk, my emotions were just swirling around. I felt off, off center, off kilter. And I remember the moment I was on the street of the homestay after about a half hour walk of letting these things settle. And I remember feeling that there was a spring in my step. I remember feeling lighter than I'd felt before, and it was like a light bulb went on in my head. And I was like, oh, okay. That's what all of this is for. That's why we open up to feel our feelings. That's why we own those feelings. That's why we communicate it. and why we allow ourselves to be seen even in our vulnerability. Because for one, there's a cathartic aspect. We release things that we didn't even know we'd been storing up. When we let go of things we didn't even know we'd been tensing. And for two, there's an element of strength that comes from being able to see ourselves as we are, not needing to present that face of strength or not needing to hide things that we feel we're vulnerable about, because every single human being has them. And when you are strong enough to allow yourself to be seen, even in your shortcomings, this is something that actually inspires respect and trust in those you connect with. So this was a massive lesson. And in a way, for me, it was just the foot in the door, because I had to unlearn all of those ways that I had learned to ice over my emotions or surf into a safer part of my mind and away from the little royally bits. So this was one of the most challenging, and I think it's been continuously challenging over my life. Whenever I've been triggered, instead of jumping into reaction or instead of walling off, to stop, take a step back, breathe with it, and ask myself, hey, what's coming up for you, man? And then just listen. And then learn to let it sit in the body too. So we're not trying to figure it out, but we just let it land and breathe through it with whatever time and space that it needs. And then suddenly you got more clarity. You understand what you actually want to say to the person that might have triggered the situation, or you understand what you need and why those emotions were coming up to begin with. So communication can be clearer and more constructive. So I don't know if this is necessarily a physically challenging experience like the one that you mentioned in the temple there, but certainly one of the most transformative and challenging and one of the most beneficial ways that has had the most impact on my life.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Israel. The idea of learning our current deficiencies and being comfortable with them as we take steps to make inroads towards betterment and mastery of some of those things, so we can have better communication and less vitriolic behavior, less angst, less stress, less things eating at us and eating at others. One of the toughest things in the world is dealing with people in the busy rat race who may not have time and energy to address their own inadequacies, so that you can have a human-to-human relationship that benefits both of you. We talk about win-win. And then if there is an organization that we're part of, you can just keep adding on the word win to all those things. And so it's like, I'm going to share this skill or service with you, and you're going to share that you're offering with me, and it's going to benefit your company, my company, our organizations, the planet, and it just keeps going. But if we're in the rat race and we're being belittled or compromised or pushed aside, so that we're living in a fear and an anxiety moment, and it endures, it can break down our neurology, or it can break down our physiology, our behavior, and it just keeps going. And I think out of my entire life, I've never seen a time where we've got more of that going on than right now. And I think it has to do with many, many things on the planet. Overcrowding seems to be one of them. Uncertainty is another one. Coming out of the boon years of, let's say, the late 40s through the 80s, where you did do a lot of planet harm, but it wasn't sustained for a period of 80 or 90 years like it has been now. And so we've got just the stress of that. You couple it with climate change, COVID, all these other things. It just seems to be eating at people. And people, I think, have turned and taken a good look at the fact that their rent keeps going up. And if they own a small business, there always seems to be one more glitch that they have to deal with on their budget, a different change in their insurance contracts, a legal change, an accounting change, a staff leaving them, staff members. It just seems to be a challenging time as far as my life has gone, that I'm sensing that it's different than it was 10 years ago by a significant degree. and maybe you can tell me if this is something that you've sensed, and if not, why, and if so, maybe add some potential remedies, some soothing therapy, and some ways we can reconnect with each other that you find that might be beneficial, Israel.
Okay. Well, I hear a lot of people giving me their assessment of what is happening in the world. And part of my practice is to assess my experience of the world personally rather than secondhand, whether it be from the perspective of another individual I'm speaking to or from the news or anything like that. And part of this for me is knowing that every bit of our experience is participatory. So here's what I mean when I say that. I could very easily align with an experience of the situation where everyone that I see is busy, stressed, closed off, unconscious, shut down, poor-tempered, feeling hollow, feeling meaningless. And the more that I tune into that, the more that that's what I see, and that's how I interpret the situation around me, the more likely that I am to receive that kind of interaction from others. Now, these are all justifiable. These are all valid from a particular point of view. There is one teacher that I've just had the opportunity to have just a little bit of instruction from her. Her name is Sharon Bolt. And I remember her sharing a post saying that every day the world will hand us something and say, this is important. Look at this. And on our deepest path, our task is to say, no, this is important, and place our hand on our heart here. So we could easily get upset about this practical concern, that practical concern, anything we want. There's reasons to get upset about it, if that is a worthwhile way for us to spend our time and our emotional energy, and if that is supportive of the things that we would like to create in our lives, awesome. But I generally don't find that getting upset or listing all of the negatives about the situation actually helps me to get where I want to go. So my practice is to see everyone, every single person, as a spark of light, and all of that busyness, all of that pain, all of that lostness, all of that stress, that's just a cloud around that little spark. So I ignore the cloud and I speak to the spark. And I will tell you a secret. Every human being needs acceptance, needs respect, needs to know that they feel that they have worth, And when you can offer that to people, sometimes it can cut through that miasma of pain and lostness and stress. And sometimes you can give someone something really, really beautiful and meaningful in that moment, just by being there and seeing them. So this is my experience of the world. I see a lot of people who are stressed out when I interact with them. And I interact with a lot of people and bring a little bit of light and see more of a smile on their face and show them, hey, you're good, man. You're human. And that's awesome. To the best that I can. So that's the kind of experience that I have walking around in the world. Sometimes I'll see people a little bit grumpy at a distance, but then as soon as I engage with them, usually we have a pretty good time. So I'm sorry, go on.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. That was good. Keep going if you want to share some more.
Well, that's what I try to share with as many people as possible. We can easily get all upset about what's going on. And when we get upset about it, then it just tends to make it more intense for us. We feed into that particular outcome. But everyone that I work with, I try to help them see ways that they can align in beautiful ways to their situation, and in ways that can inspire others to do the same.
Wonderful. So I would say that there are many parables and sacred books that discuss what I said, and then what the response was from the shaman, the Messiah, whatever great teacher was cited in this sacred book. So I guess there's nothing new under the sun. That piece of literary wisdom, nothing new under the sun. There are times of the planet and the people living on that planet where they seek more connection. And there are other times where they're in the flow more and things are clicking along. Like, I think if I look back in the 60s and 70s, I jokingly on one of my profiles, I think it was on Airbnb or something like that, where I mentioned one of my goals is to bring back 1970s block parties. And what that entailed to me is that it didn't matter what religion or that ethnicity and all the other things you can throw in there that have an occasion to separate people. Here was the Saturday block party where the kids are doing what they do, the adults doing what they do, the grandparents, the friends who are visiting. And it's just this giant block party where food gets exchanged, we share drinks, we share some good times, some laughter, and the kids are doing what they do. And we just work through a few hours. And then, something good might come out of it. Somebody might say, hey, I've got a bunch of stuff and so down the street is moving. Why don't we all have a garage sale on the same day and we'll advertise it in this way and that way, and I'll organize the cooking and you'll organize this, and all of a sudden you've got a street-wide garage sale. I think that type of a thing is part of much of our rural lifestyle, and people coming from Europe or wherever and coming to the East Coast of the United States in the 1800s, early 1900s. I think that was something that harkens back to that era, and less separation. I know there was separation of different ethnicities and different social classes, etc. Even street gangs that, one street away are gearing up to fight the other street gang at age 12, But some of this harkening back to the 60s and 70s, which is the era of my youth, is something that I think is got some beauty to it. And I hope that I sort of long for it, and I hope that I can initiate more of that type of cooperative celebration and connection in the era which we're in and which we will be in the days and weeks to come. I don't know if you've been to those types of parties, Israel, or if you think that they are something you're going to bless my seeking to recreate those.
Oh, absolutely. I can't say that I've been to all that many parties like that, but I'll say that I think it's a great thing to bring more connection, to bring more inclusion. The whole focus of my work in the world is for the individual, inspire the flowering of consciousness, to help each person that I can connect with their freedom, power, and purpose. But that leads into healthy, inspired collective action. That's where it's got to go. Otherwise, an individual's consciousness, if we don't actually engage with it in the world, it's just some beautiful intentions and it's great for that individual. But if we don't take it into that collective action, then it falls flat. And actually, at this point, I'd like to share a little neat story. So I've shared with you a little bit about my book. My book is called Only Human, right? And I chose that name for a reason. So you're familiar with Ben Franklin, right?
I am a big fan of Ben Franklin.
Awesome. Okay, he was once asked, and he's an inventor, brilliant individual and across the board. But he was once asked, probably at a dinner party, what is your favorite invention that you have created of all of them? Do you know what his answer was?
The one I'm going to create tomorrow.
That's a beautiful answer. That is. But his answer was the American. See, at this time, you didn't have Americans. You had Virginians, you had Carolinians, you had members of each of these separate colonies, and they viewed themselves as separate from one another. But in creating the term American, Ben Franklin offered a term where they could all look at one another and see themselves as part of the same group, So this is, in a way, this is why I've written only human, focusing on the human bit, including as widely as we can, because really not everyone will agree with me in this, but I see all different spiritual truths, all different cultural perspectives as different flashlights in the same dark room. And I see that the issues that we have, the misunderstandings and the arguments about the form of the message, all of these undercut the essence of the message, which is just that we're all connected. And this interrelatedness of all life, not just human life, but all life on the planet, this is the foundation of our all practical morality. Every tribal people, they would look at I need, they would look at reciprocity, look at the interconnectedness of all beings. And this is central to our balance, central to our health as humans, and to our interaction with the world in such a way that it will be that it will continuously be inviting to us and comfortable to us, So what I'm trying to do, to the best of my ability, is bring in a sense of we are all human so that we can share this and so that we can more easily do this healthy, inspired, self-sustaining, small community, green kind of action that will, help us move a little bit more in the direction that'll bring us back to balance.
Yes, yes. I'm going to take a big breath on that one and let that sink in. So I had the occasion, Israel, to do a hike with 3 people who are just a little older than half my age last Saturday. And on this hike, different conversations came up, and I got to share a little bit of my Sifu guru look back at history, sociology, human relations, politics, all these types of things. And you mentioned Ben Franklin and being an American, creating the American. And I think that's lovely. And I think having pride in where you live and having pride in your declarations, your constitutions, your bills of rights, your education system, your farming system, I think it's wonderful. That pride, that good feeling that your grandfathers and your grandmothers did some good things, and you look back and you see those good things, and you attempt to advance things holistically, not just with machines and using something up and destroying something, for hyper productivity or financial gain or increased net revenues, these types of things. So they were asking me, the word came up about patriotism. And I said, well, first of all, patriotism was a big theme in my first 20 some years of life. It was part of what we felt in school. We learned about it, we felt it, we got that from our parents, aunts, and uncles. And I happen to have been born 17 years after the end of World War II, so 1945 to 1962. That's not very long. The feelings were still permeating. And the Vietnam War was going to soon to kick up. The stress that was beginning to cause the Vietnam War had already been enacted. It had already been brewing. So the first 20 years of my life, there was a lot of this patriotism. And then the Cold War was in full bloom. And there were, spies that were captured by Soviet friendly countries and the Soviet Union, spies that were captured by the United States and our allies. And so there was all of this type of stuff, and the papers certainly love to talk about those stories. And the politicians, of course, often, were flag waving people. And lots of our films that were produced in and around World War II, and they had a run for 20 some years after the end of World War II with World War II films. And because of Nazism, you still see films related to that, famous films like gosh, the Scoundrels movie that was produced 6 years ago. And so these things are out there, and they asked me about patriotism. They said, you see that as the number one problem now? And I said, well, coming from America, I can tell you that the problem that I see among fellow Americans is polarization. So you have very religious versus medium versus non-religious. You have in Christianity, you have all these different sects and different preachers who are part of the same sect who are at odds and may draw their parishioners along for that ride. And then parishioners who disagree, they want to leave that church. So I see all this big polarization, so Republican, Democrat, and then polarization about how we feel about males, females, transgenders, gays, all these types of things. And then I see polarization about how we do education with charter schools, private schools, public schools, homeschooling. I just see these separations. So I said, to me, in terms of a discussion point of the last 20 years, and very much growing, very much escalating over the last 5 to 7 years, I think this separation by this idea of adhering to our point of view to the point of almost fighting and maybe even pulling out a weapon towards someone who is against that point of view. And we saw that in the insurrections when Trump was supposed to leave office in Washington, D.C. and in other cases. So I see this as something that is marking the recent decades and is basically gotten out of control. Where it will go, I don't know. But I think the world in these aspects needs prayers and blessings around being open-hearted, open-minded, and being more relaxed in our conversations and more smiling. And if I had to say one thing that was pivotal in my learning about Native Americans, I got to speak with a medicine man about 12 years ago. And I said, what's the one thing that I should take away from our few-hour conversation that many people don't know about the Native American culture and how they behaved? And this gentleman told me, it's really the laughter and the joking that these people did. So the lightheartedness is something that I think we need to be more open to, and we need to be more silly and less intrusive on each other's points of view or current points of view. And Israel, maybe you can share some things that'll help me on that journey and help society on that journey towards lightheartedness.
I'll address the journey towards lightheartedness in a moment. First, I just wanted to touch upon something just for clarification. Like when I brought up Ben Franklin, it wasn't about patriotism, right? What it was about was a term that we could all look at and say we all identify with that same term. And that's something that allows us to see us as a one thing rather than as individuals in separate camps. So patriotism is a beautiful thing, just like pride is a beautiful thing. It's great to look at yourself and see, yes, I'm amazing. But patriotism becomes an issue like pride becomes an issue when we look at ourselves and say, well, I'm amazing and you're not as good as me. Well, that becomes something that feeds polarization. You know, when we can have healthy pride, we can say, yes, I'm amazing and you're amazing too. And we can invite that amazingness in the other, you know, without cutting our own light or without trying to step on anybody. And I feel like patriotism can be very helpful in this way as well, if we can understand our value without needing to denigrate others in the process. So when I mentioned the only human bit, the human, I'm trying to do the same thing with the word human as Ben Franklin did with the word American, to give us a label, since we're so fond of labels, to give us a label that we can equally all claim and equally realize that humans are all connected to other humans, and the fate of all humans is intertwined, so we can act for our own common interest. In terms of the lightheartedness, man, that polarization, I like to dig layers deep, you know, and we identify with things. On the early part of the human journey, we identify with things so that we can understand ourselves better, so that we can know who we are. But often, in the way it's played in the human world, this identification means that we line up in these polarized camps, you know. The core of the problem is that we aren't any of these things. No one is a Democrat. No one is a Republican. No one is whatever label you want to put to it. They are perhaps playing that role right now. And that's awesome. But at their core, they're human. At their core, they're life. So lightheartedness is a whole lot easier when we can actually open up and see how blessed we are in this one moment, which is really, really hard if we're reiterating to ourselves all of the ways that things are a problem, or the world is terrible, or this group over there is messing everything up for everyone. If we're focused on these kinds of stories, and that's what we give space to in our heads, then it's really, really, really hard to open up and say, wow, you know, I'm not starving. You know, I've got a roof over my head. You know, I'm not dying of thirst. Gee, life actually is pretty blessed for me at the moment. You know, the more that we can open up to see those blessings, the better life feels. And the more that we'll tend to actually share those blessings with those we run across. Because, you know, if you're looking for something missing, if you're looking for something to be upset about, if you're looking for something wrong, you will always find it. There's always something, always some shortcoming or some future stress to deal with or some old regret. But the more that we can actually open up and look at what we're dealing with right now in this one moment, the more that there is to smile about and the more there is to laugh about. I think one of the main practices that I try to do, and I've shared this in a way in our conversation thus far, is to hold honey in my heart. You know, now if I am sour about the world and I see how it's all terrible and how it's all going to crap and how everyone is ignorant, then this is the kind of interaction that I share with people. This is the kind of mood that I carry around and the gift that I'm given to those that cross my path. But if I hold in as much joy and honest joy here, because toxic positivity, I'll talk about that in a minute, because that's not going to get us where we want to go.
I
But the
love
more
that
that
word. I've never heard it before, and so you're the initiator in my mind on the curiosity of toxic positivity. I think that's wonderful.
That's great. Yeah. Well, it fits in really well with what we're discussing here, because what I'm talking about is honestly opening up to perceive the blessings and joy of this one moment, connecting with it all the way down, and then trying to make that, learning to make that our baseline so that we share that with the world around us. Because anything that happens starts with you. Anything in my world that happens, it starts with me. It's not about getting other people to understand something different. It's about changing how I show up to this one moment of experience and bringing something different. In this case, bringing the blessing. So it's important to talk about toxic positivity when discussing things like this, because often people will try to bypass emotions that are uncomfortable that are coming up. Say you have anger coming up and you've been studying for years and you know, oh, I shouldn't feel angry. Or maybe there's a part of you that says it's wrong to feel angry. So we stuff it down and we cultivate a demeanor of the positive, a little too positive, honestly, like a little just grating, right? We cultivate that as sometimes a way of escaping or hiding emotions that we're uncomfortable with. But here's the deal. Emotions don't go away until we process them. And we don't process them in the head. We process them in the body. So to hold honey in your heart the way that I have described also means being committed to feeling your feelings when they come up. If you try to avoid feeling these feelings, it doesn't matter how you try to show up to the situation. it's going to come through the cracks. Suppressed emotions build up, they spill over, they cause mistakes, they cause us to unconsciously seek out the same kinds of situations that initially triggered those emotions. So in bringing lightness, open your eyes to the blessings and commit to feeling what you actually are feeling and giving space in the body to let it ease. And then I guess the other bit, processing old emotions will help to make our emotional space lighter, and it'll naturally bring in the sense of joy and lightness that is our natural state. Intending to bring that to each situation, that helps us to learn how to use our will in ways that actually align with our needs. And the third step is perception, is seeing the beauty in the situation, even if it's hard, seeing what it offers you, seeing the beauty in the person, even if at this moment they're in cross purposes with you, but seeing that spark of light and interacting with that to the best of our ability. And that brings in joy, man, because the world is awesome. And if we don't put stuff in the way that keep us from seeing that, then that's how we'll feel.
Wonderful. Toxic positivity. Yeah. 1990s Valley Girl expression, gag me with a spoon. All right. So that sounds like a response to some toxic positivity where someone is too positive and faking it. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. You know, some people are bubbly and can't help but be positive. That's I would say a small minority of the people you run into, but those are people who are fun to have around. And then there's the idea of change. And sometimes change means that there's a wall and someone has to have the power to break through that wall and then clean up that wall when it's been raised and then rebuilt. And so that's just part of the way when there are opposing forces. So the martial arts talks about this. The warfare books of literary and philosophy history talk about this. And I'll share one story about the Chosen-ji temple and center that I feature in my picture behind me. One of the things that we talked about, we learned about Japan, and the samurais, I imagine there's samurai practices still going on. Besides in martial arts centers, there are people who that's part of their practice is being a samurai. Doesn't mean that they're going out and invading or defending, but that's part of their spiritual practice and martial arts preparation. And they could be doing that in their own dojo at home or in their own living room or front porch. So one thing they shared with us, the master was teaching us, is that in the sitting practice, you are in a meditative state. You are in this heightened focus, this connection with your mind and body and your spirit, all these things. But if there was an invasion, if there was an intrusion of enemies, it could be enemies or like somebody who was banished from this temple now comes back alone or with a group of people. You have to be ready to get up with your hands, your feet, a sword, a shield, whatever you have at a moment's notice when these people penetrate the material of the wall. And you've seen some of these temples that it's a sheet of something made out of, I don't know if it's rice paper or what that's made out of, but it's many times easily penetrable. So you have to be ready to defend at a moment's notice. And so that's part of this samurai's temple's awareness and preparedness. And so I think that in our walk in life, being a person who's slight in stature, I'm tall and thin, and don't have, I would say, an aggressive personality or aggressive countenance, that for some reason I haven't attracted a lot of violence in my life. I've had violent talk, what do they call it, communication directed at me. I've had all the things about lying, cheating, and stealing. I've been through those types of things, but I haven't had a lot of physical attacking in my life. But I do, in my practice of awareness, I am sensorily prepared I try to be essentially prepared at all times for such occasions. I also, when I walk down steps or up steps or I'm cutting something, I try to use heightened awareness in those points so I don't trip and hurt myself. I don't cut myself. And if I'm helping someone else, I try to be in a heightened state of awareness while I'm doing that so that I can help them not hurt themselves and be focused on what we're doing or what they're doing. And so maybe you can share some things about being in the flow, Israel, and being prepared to defend your points of view if need be.
Have you had any background with Tai Chi?
I love Tai Chi, and that's one thing I wish I had another half hour to an hour, 5 days a week to do more Tai Chi.
I hear you. So I love Tai Chi as well. And it's one of those things. I was in martial arts for years before I encountered Tai Chi, doing a lot of the physical training, physical preparation, toning, learning how to move, learning how to have that kind of situational awareness, that intentional heightened awareness for a moment, right? Same kind of situational awareness they'll teach you in the military, which is awesome, but it requires effort. So I'd mentioned earlier in our conversation, there is a soft focus. So there's a way of releasing other things that might call upon your attention to softly open to what you're experiencing right now. And this actually offers equal or greater level of awareness than intentional situational awareness, and with much less effort. So it's easier to incorporate this throughout your life. So with Tai Chi, for example, if you're doing push hands, one way that my teacher described this to me that has been incredibly helpful is to see that the body exists within a ball of energy. And whenever you have force coming at you, what you're doing is maintaining the integrity of that circle, of that bubble of energy. And you move your base so that force, that straight line, can move unimpeded, or maybe just be slightly turned into an arc, while you maintain your center, you maintain your space. So when I am conducting myself through life, in every moment, I am aware of this bubble around me. And this bubble, in part, it is my physical space, the physical space that is immediately around my body, within my arm's reach. In part, it is a space of attention and perception and story. So when you have a force coming at you, whether it's a physical force or whether it's an emotional spear, if you will, or a force of words and ideas that's directed to you, you can respond in exactly the same way. And this is one thing that came up when you were talking about the wall and talking about change. You know, there's a way to change, to invite change, where you never actually have to try to push down the wall or break the wall. You can simply allow it to be. So for example, when defending my perspective, you know, in a way, it's like there's a spear of words and emotion that is coming into my field. And I have the opportunity to respond to that on the level of words and emotions, the same way that I was taught to respond to something similar to that physically. I have the opportunity to move and meet so that this is responded to gracefully, followed along the line that it wants to go, and that energy is returned back to where it had come from. So I see even an argument that comes up as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to heal or resolve a rift, an opportunity to overcome my temptation to respond in a triggered way, and instead respond with acceptance and love to that core of light at the very center of the person. So with all of this, I recognize that I am a ball of energy, and all throughout the day, all throughout my life, there are different forces that are coming in, and I have the opportunity to navigate this. So my living practice in life is to respond to all of those forces in a way that has no resistance, Wu Wei style, you know, in a way that maintains the center, in a way that allows and invites and uh, transforms even those harsh linear energies into smooth circular energies. So I don't know if this really describes what I'm trying to describe all that well, but I will say that since I truly came to understand this, conflict is much fewer and farther between. I mean, you'll run into unreasonable people, and that's hard. You know, everybody's on their own journey. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink it. But even when I run into those unreasonable people these days, I look at a beautiful opportunity to overcome a trigger for temptation, to honor that person and not be polarized against them, but to see that I can speak to them in such a way that will inspire connection, that will inspire new awareness, that might move a heart and a mind, you know? So that's really where I come at it from these days, man. And as a result, conflict is less and less in my life. Tension is less and less. And more often, when I have someone speak to me initially upset or in an aggressive way, more often we're able to come out of that situation feeling really happy with one another and beautiful to have had the conversation. So that's my take on it. I don't know if I
Yeah,
addressed really.
yeah. I would like to ask you a couple of things that are sort of cataclysmic events, and see what your thoughts are as a shaman. So, as a Sifu, I still have a do the right thing and protect and defend part of my higher calling, let's say.
Mm.
And I think there might be something with a past life where I was a defender, and I was big and strong, and I could do a lot of defending. So I've been in touch with that thing since I was a little lad. And it's interesting that I came around this time at 6'2" and 170, but certainly a little sapling before I got to be in my 20s. And I had to figure out how to do things without a lot of physical force, using dexterity in sports, using fitness, using flow, biomechanics, technique, all those types of things. And this is part of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which is interesting because Royce Gracie, who did real well in the early 90s and later, was a phenomenal jiu-jitsu, they called him player, a jiu-jitsu player, who's about 2 years younger than I am. Our bodies are pretty similar. When we work out, we don't look like Hercules. We look like the average guy who is a swimmer, maybe something like that. And so he did all of his things with those techniques and flow and endurance and training and all those types of things. He didn't do it with brute force. Not that he isn't strong, but he certainly is not a 220-pound linebacker looking guy. So what I'm going to share is that the buffalo and the decimation of the Native American tribes because of a variety of things, disease, putting them off of their land, killing the buffalo. It did so much harm to the modern era that if I had the chance, whether it was through circular energy or through linear energy, I would have made my best attempt to do something to salvage part of the West. One of the thoughts I had is that anyone with an open mind would say, I think, I shouldn't say it that way, I should say, with an open mind, you might look at North Dakota and South Dakota, places that are very hard to live, even with modern conveniences. I know people who've lived there the last 20 years, and it's harsh weather, could be wind, could be cold, could be whatever. It's just not an easy place to grow a garden, a harsh place to live. I mean, they could have said, the people who were involved in the 1800s and building our land, manifest destiny and all those things, they could have said, give the Native Americans North Dakota, South Dakota, maybe Wyoming, and let the buffaloes reign free there. Do something like that. So I would have, with hindsight, if I were put back there in a time machine, I would have tried to have been the Joan of Arc in a man's body and a masculine energy, to have salve discussions, putting salve on them, and said, look, I come from the future. I'm coming, back from the future in my DeLorean, and I'm here to tell you that the biggest mistake you're going to do is to decimate the Native Americans and decimate the buffalo and the whole spirituality and culture of these Native Americans. It's a really big mistake, and it's worth dying to protect us from making that mistake. I say us in terms of the people who were here in the 1800s who did the damage. And so I believe that I would have fought for that, knowing what I know now. And I'll turn it over to you to see if there's another way I should look at it, and to put my intention and energy around that question.
Well, I was raised with a deep appreciation for my Native American heritage. I was raised, to the best of my father's ability, he raised us with as much of a tribal perspective as he could engender. So that means that when I look at the world around me, I see that every part of it is alive, and I see that every part of it deserves respect. And I see that the balance of nature is more important than the desires of humanity. I see that every bit of the natural world has its medicine to offer that will help us to live in balance and to be healthy and in line with the world and with one another. And I see that, I have seen since I was very young, that the people who share this culture with me do not see that. They do not realize that plants are alive, and that we actually should consider, before we just kill something that's alive, we should consider the place that it has in the world and the space that it holds and the impact, So the problem that you're describing, you could see in hindsight how much of a tragedy it is. But the thing is, it's not over. It's still happening. Every way that we engage with the natural world as this global, scientific, materialist, Western-oriented, progress-oriented society, every way that we engage with the natural world is unconscious and disrespectful. Now, I see humanity like an individual. So I look back over my own experiences as an individual to help gain insight into the larger collective journey that we're playing out. And I've needed to make a lot of mistakes in my life. I've needed to go on some downward spirals and get really lost to myself before I could really learn any lessons. Well, before I could learn the most powerful ones. Seeing that, I have hope. I have hope for us as a race, as humanity, to wake up and realize that we are stewards of the land and we are part of the ecosystem, and our responsibility is to act as stewards in such a way that we invite the abundance of the land, we invite the balance, we keep things healthy instead of push towards extremes as they are now. So I would not go back at any point in my life and advise myself to not make a certain mistake, because those mistakes have been absolutely essential for me to be in the place that I am now. Similarly, I wouldn't try to go back in time and undo something that has been done, even though it is absolutely a tragedy. And I agree with you there. What I do, to the best of my ability, is to help people to see the living world and to feel the living world and to connect with it and have a personal relationship with it. So that instead of seeing something that's inanimate that we can just cut down or burn down or pour in toxins as we like, we see something that is alive, conscious, with personality and character that we engage with directly. And then we have another reason. We've got an opportunity to think about it, to reconsider before we just act harmfully with the world around us. Now, when I was younger, seeing all of this, it was so jarring. I felt that the Western world, the way that we're doing it, the modern world, is so off track that the best thing that could happen to us would be to have it all torn down and have humans have an opportunity to rebuild from the rubble, you know? And I can understand that perspective. These days, what I prefer to do is to try to share consciousness, try to educate to the best of my ability. Because if we're going to fall, we're going to fall. What we need after that fall is the seeds planted that will help us to rebuild from a state of balance. And if that fall doesn't happen, what we need are the seeds planted that'll help us to see how we can move into a place of balance. So either way, that's the center of the journey, to plant these seeds that help us to see that this is a living world, and our fate and the fate of the natural world are intertwined. They cannot be separate from one another.
Yes, yes. So the Tai Chi energy, did you call it circular energy?
Well, say if you have a punch coming at you, that is a linear force. If you were to take that linear force and curve it, then it would become more of a circular force. Now, linear forces are destructive and they have an end. They end up running into something. Circular forces, all of the balanced energy in the natural world flows in circles. So the circle is one way that we can take this linear force and bring it back into balance. So I don't know if that clarified what I intended to describe there.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that here's a tree in the wind. So a tree will go with the wind back and forth, but then when the wind switches, it's going to do its thing here and be in a circle. And the root system, you know, could be different on one side of the tree than on the other side. It may run out of room on one side, it may have rocks, it may have other trees. So it's got to navigate that pressure that comes in. So I think the circular, of course, is more sustainable for that tree if the wind is shifting. If it's constantly coming one direction, I guess the tree comes down and then it finds a way to come back. It may come back straight, but it may also go down and come back on a side where the energy is easier to get back to the starting point. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about a palm tree, coconut tree, and some because of the way the winds flow from one direction frequently, they're bent over one way. So that's an interesting thing. And I still want to know more about how the soil underneath the sand can sustain a palm tree or a coconut tree. Where all the nutrients in that sand, and does it come from the rain? How does it get down there, and how much nutrients does a palm and a coconut tree need? Because it's so different than a rainforest or a deciduous forest or an evergreen forest. Just completely different, the soil.
That's true. I have seen some of the root balls of palm trees, man, massive. So that at least shows me how they can stay upright. And I've imagined speaking to a tree with regard to water. It's like, what, you don't filter your own water? Because trees do. They're very, very clever about working with the sun and the oxygen and the minerals from the soil and all of the water in the bit around them. But I don't know exactly. I don't know about palm trees well enough to know exactly how they're getting what they need out of the sandy soil.
I have some other topics for another discussion, and I'll send them to you via email. See if you're interested in taking them on in the future. I think we've come to a point where it's probably a good time to say we'll do it again if we want to do it again, and bless the conversation that we've had. It's been wonderful for me to share this time with you, Israel, and I think maybe you could share your website and maybe what your most recent initiative is about, and then I'll share mine, and then we could ask for people to like and subscribe, and we'll call it a show.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So probably one of the most exciting things recently for me has been to publish my book. My book is called Only Human, an operating manual for sensitives and seekers. And it's a guided tour of the human experience with an eye for self-empowerment, with an eye for self-mastery and refining all the little bits. And my whole journey has been to explore all the different spiritual and cultural and religious and magical perspectives that I could, and then implement these things and streamline all of that into a single, clear, very human curriculum and path of development. And so that's what I've done, looking at and workshopping breath, emotions, attention and presence, our acceptance and accountability, reclaiming personal power, our stories and discernment, and then going straight to the core of being itself. So this is something that I'm incredibly excited to share with the world. And in addition to the book, I am also launching a course, a 16-week course, The Only Human Foundations, where I take people through it step by step and offer tools that are going to open the doors for them for the rest of their lives. So it's amazing stuff, and so glad to be able to showcase it a little bit. My website is still a work in progress, but for those who would like to go on and check it out, it is onlyhumanwisdom.com. And on there, I've got a little free mini course, and I'm setting up to present my books and courses and things like that on there as well. And I mean, I guess that's it. I have a lot of short writings on Facebook if anyone would like to just read some smaller essays or articles or things like that. And that would just be Israel Bouseman on Facebook. I'm the only one, so should be easy to find.
Good. I'll list that below. Israel, thanks for sharing.
You're welcome, brother.
I should clarify that my comment about South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming is not to discount in any way the people who have lived there since the 1800s. And it's not to say that decimating a population and kicking them off of the other parts of the United States where they were and putting them on 3 states is something that I think is okay. I'm just saying, if you're going to be in a clash of cultures, that's what I heard one Native American talk about in a documentary. I'd been looking at this story, you know, the federal troops and the settlers versus the Native American for a long time. And then finally I saw this documentary sometime maybe 10 years ago, and this PhD professor who was a Native American said it was a clash of cultures, and that's how you have to look at it. It's the only way it made sense to him, and now when I look at that, it makes sense to me. But in terms of, you know, the differences in cultures and decimating, I still think there's a way to have taken a little bit of the bad and mixed in something that was allowing a culture to sustain itself in more of a natural, historic way, and the buffaloes as well. So that's why I mentioned those three very not highly populated states. Nobody would have given them California or New York back then, but maybe they could have done that. That's my romantic way of looking back. So didn't mean to offend anyone on that story. That's just a for instance that I came up with in my delirium of looking at this thing for so many years that I said, hey, what about that idea? Anyway, that's sharing. So my opus book is called Sedentary Nation, and it's the journey from being a hunter-gatherer to the farming societies, to the Industrial Revolution, to the service-oriented society of desk, couch, and car potatoes, to the modern era of digital living and living on our phones and our computers and any other, our watches, our smart watches, and the new things that they're doing with sunglasses. All of that is the journey from physical movement as a normal part of the day to non-physical movement as a lifestyle, and what we can do to live more like people who used to move their bodies, and doing it in an intentional and a holistic way, so that it's not a chore as in forcing us to go to the gym, but it's more of a part of the day, just like flossing your teeth, to use our body in a meaningful way that we feel good and we look good and we have good posture, and helps our mind, body, spirit connect itself through that movement. So that's my opus. I'd suggest to some people that would fit in with some of the things that Israel and I have talked about today. And my website is sedentarynation.com. And I welcome your feedback on anything we shared. And you want to reach Israel, we'll have his information down below. And we'd ask you to give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, and if this helped you or moved you in any way, please pass it around. And with that, Israel, any last things, or we'll just say goodbye?
So much, so much. I think we've covered a lot of really beautiful stuff today. I like what you were just mentioning in terms of moving, right? Conscious motion is so incredible. If we can actually get up and move and be aware of the motion that we're having and the breath that we're having, we get a lot more freedom. Because if we're stuck in our heads, if we're stuck in our memories, stuck in our stories, then we're not actually here seeing the choices that we have and actively engaging with our lives. So freedom is important to you. Get up and move around.
That's it. Yeah, the funny thing, Israel, that I share is that some people have called the modern human neurotic because we've got the mind going all the time, and it tends to flip switches that we wouldn't ordinarily switch because of fear, scarcity, lack, over programming, too much information, all of these things. So we don't let the mind rest. So I jokingly tell people, and I shared this with these 3 younger hikers the other day after the conversation about polarization. I said, according to my philosophy, I said, you know what the body's job is in the modern era? And they said, what? I said, it's to carry around the head, because that's where people live many times in the modern era. So that's what our body does. It carries us around to the cafe, to the refrigerator, to our whatever we're doing, to our car, whatever, our scooter. It's the body's job is to carry around the head, because that's where we live. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. A lot of times in this society, we're taught how to approach things from an intellectual point of view. We learn through stories, and we get kind of weak in other areas. So here's what I'll say. Human beings are absolutely incredible. We are amazing. We're capable of far more than we know. But in order to access this, we have to come into alignment. And alignment means starting to get into our bodies. Like I was mentioning with emotions before, you know, they're not cleared up here in the head. They're processed in the body. So we got to be in the body, feeling it and allowing our body to shift to let these things sink in and clear. Otherwise, we'll just continue to keep them around, you know? If we're not paying attention to where we are and what we're doing, if our mind is scattered or focused on stories or things in the future or the past, then we're out of touch with our power, with our attention, and how it's creating something right now in this one moment. So the key of all of that, if we want to step into the depths of amazingness that will just absolutely blow our minds, it comes back to the body, to breath, emotions, and just really arriving here where we are.
Perfect. Great way to wind it down. And if anyone wants to connect with Israel to book a session or look into his writings, you may find his information down below. Same thing with me. It's very automated on my website. If you want to book a session, there's a place to do that. And that's what our job is. We are teachers mastering our teaching. And we've been at this a long time, and it was our intention for a long time to learn how to help ourselves and master ourselves, and then pass that on to other people. And that's really our role in society. So if you want to tap into that and start an arrangement with us, please feel free to reach out, and we'll see if we can help connect some things for you. And until we see each other again, I'm Sifu Slim. Please like and subscribe. Over to Israel, and we'll say goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Sifu, for having me on today. This has been really lovely. And yeah, for anyone who would like to reach out, I offer courses, I offer personal sessions. And there are a number of ways that I work with people. So just reach out if this has resonated, and I look forward to meeting you. Thank you again, brother.
Aloha, brother. Take care.